Historian, author, and translator, A.R. Venkatachalapati is currently professor at the Madras Institute of Development Studies in Chennai. He has published widely on the social, cultural, and intellectual history of colonial Tamil Nadu, and his latest book, The Province of the Book, Scholars, Scribes, and Scribblers in Colonial Tamil Nadu, which is published by Permanent Black, focuses on the history and culture of books, book publishing, and book reading in Tamil Nadu, from what he describes as the time of the parchment to the time of page makeup. I now call upon Professor Chalapati to please address the gathering.
Vanakkam, good morning. It gives me immense pleasure to be here. I consider it a great honor to be present here. I was just told a few minutes ago by Vinuta that last year it was Ganesh Devi who spoke here. So I think it's a very big honor to be among the publishing fraternity. There is also a great amount of sentiment that is attached to this place, to Goa. The very first book to be printed in India was printed in Goa, 1577, Doctrina Christina or Thambiran Vanakkam. So, as a historian of the book, it's a epiphanic moment, if I may say so. So I thank the organizers, especially Leonard, for inviting me. Not only inviting me, but also accommodating my schedule. I come here with my interest in a range of issues connected to books. Of course, primarily I am a consumer of books. I am what I am because of books, and therefore I am very keen to reflect about books. Books has made us so, I think. Primarily our interest is as consumer. And of course, I am also a producer of books. I write, and I write in 2 languages. I have experience in publishing. I can read proofs. I have read proofs. I have commissioned books. I have edited books or continue to edit books. There is also the aspect of my having been a librarian for about 3 or 4 years in one of the great Tamil research libraries. And as an academic, I'm involved with libraries. So one is involved in library committees and hopefully make some impact on the kind of acquisitions one can make. I think the question of library acquisition is something that publishing professionals have to really think about. Hopefully, towards the end of my presentation, I'll be able to say something about that. And then lastly, of course, I have an academic interest in the study of the book. So I have done the history of print culture, focusing on Tamil Nadu, but hopefully it has also a comparative dimension. And so as somebody who's involved in books, both in its history and how it is produced now, the present, I try to look about, I am concerned about the future. So this is what brings me here. One thing that I notice among the culturally inclined people, which includes people from the book world, is this great fear and anxiety. There is a great book written by the French historian Georges Lefebvre, who talks about the great fear which came before the French Revolution. I think a strong parallel can be drawn in relation to the book trade as well. Wherever you go, people who are involved with books are always predicting, forecasting the demise of the book. A prediction is also immediate. They fear that the death is around the corner, it is a proximate death. I frankly do not think that this great fear is justified. It's a great flux is happening, but books are not going to die in my generation, in our generation. I'm sure about that. I want to start on that positive note. Why do I say so? First parallel that I want to draw is from the other printed artifact, the newspaper. All over the world, we always draw parallels from the West. We don't even draw global parallels. We are not talking about other language cultures outside the Western world. So I think that is perhaps a very wrong way to look at things, which leads to a great amount of pessimism. Whenever you talk about your fascination for print, your interest in print, some people who are not interested in books, they are the ones who are saying books will not exist. I simply don't care about that. People who don't read books, what do I care about their views about books? Okay. So they say Washington Post is winding up, Chicago Tribune is being sold. It's like, real estate speculation. Somebody came and told me, you know what, real estate prices in Chennai has come down. This plot of land has come down from 3.5 crores to 3 crores. It's not relevant to me. So it's the same kind of analogy I will draw. What does the Indian story tell us? Robin Jeffrey, the Australian-based historian who started working on contemporary media, he had a book called India's Newspaper Revolution. There is indeed a newspaper revolution in India. This is happening at the same time when the English newspaper press is not actually folding up. It might be having some problems. English newspapers continue to do reasonably well. But in terms of Indian language newspapers, there has been a phenomenal growth in the last 20 years. The reports that we have, which journalists like 79 have documented, historians like Robin Jeffrey have said, in the Hindi belt, there is a quantum leap in the number of newspapers, in the print runs, and in readership. Same thing holds for a couple of other languages. I am told that Malayalam newspapers are still doing well. And in the case of Tamil, there is actually, instead of the 4 newspapers, there is a 5th newspaper, Tamil newspaper, which has just been launched 5 days ago by the Hindu group. So capitalists invest where there is possibility of returns, and I think they are the best judge. In fact, it is only in the last 5 or 6 years that 3 major newspapers in Tamil became 4. And we know how, with some bit of injection of money from the government, the Kalanidhi Maran Brothers Tamil newspaper, which was a floundering newspaper, which was bought over, is selling a lot. So by hook or crook, and as far as books go, I don't mind using all kinds of methods to propagate books. That's why I mentioned earlier that we have to talk about library acquisitions. The moment you say hook or crook, libraries and Indian institutional libraries should come to your mind immediately. So this is the newspaper press. So even though there is a big chasm dividing newspaper readers and book readers, they are not exclusive sets. There is going to be spillover from newspaper readers to book readers. I use the term spillover advisedly because the magnitude of newspaper readership and the magnitude of book readers is very, very different, and spillovers are enough to sustain book publishers. So what is the story about the book publishing trade in the last 20 years? One event is distinctly marked in my memory. In 1992, when we first heard that Vikram Seth was given 1.2 crores as advance for Suitable Boy, that made the news. Nowadays, those issues don't make the news at all. That is also a very salutary lesson. When Vikram Seth got that advance of 1.2 crores, I made a rough calculation, and I actually thought that the entire Tamil book publishing industry could be bought with that money. Mild bit of exaggeration. I don't think the Tamil book publishing industry was more than 2 or 3 crores in 1992. Now, neither Kalanidhi Maran nor Rupert Murdoch or anybody else can buy up the Tamil book trade. Simply put. First, let us see how English publishing grew in the 1990s. We know Penguin came in the early 90s. It made a big impact on trade books. Almost at the same time, Sage came and made a big impact on academic publishing. The last 20 years, for all the complaints that we make about dwindling book turnovers and things like that, what is the actual picture? Almost all the publishers that you see are publishers who emerged in the 90s. Whether you look at the big publishers, 90s and the next decade also, the big trade publishers, multinationals came in. HarperCollins came in, Random House came in. And then barely 7-8 years ago, Routledge was here. CUP is here. I'm told that Harvard University Press is going to come. So both trade and academic publishing, there has been a great amount of capital infusion. But more important than this big influx of substantial capital is also what gives the charm to books. And select books produced with a certain audience in mind, with a certain set of readers in mind, not carpet bombing. Carpet bombings don't work culturally. And I think that is the area that we have to focus on. The niche publishing that have emerged in the last 15 to 20 years, whether the feminist publishing that was championed by Kali for Women and subsequently Zuban, the niche publishing of Navayana with its focus on caste, the coming in of Permanent Black, independent publishers like Yoda, all these have actually changed the publishing scene, and it is exactly at the time when the patient has been, the prognosis for the patient has been very bad. We have been finding the emergence of all these publishers. The same scene, I think, obtains in large parts of India. This is my understanding. Bengal is a separate case. I'm told Maharashtra is doing very well. I have some familiarity with Malayalam publishing. More and more books are being published. In the case of Tamil, I would say the last 10 to 12 years has been the golden age of Tamil publishing, with all its problems. I have been going to the Madras Book Fair for the last 25-30 years. Until about the late 90s, the Madras Book Fair was like a lover's park. You can have a quiet stroll in the Madras Book Fair with your partner. Nobody would notice. But since the 2000, managing crowds have been a very big problem. So that's phenomenally, it has become a cultural festival. So this is in terms of readers. And in the last few years, book fairs have spread across the Tamil region, and it has become the most important conduit for distribution of books. But in terms of the increase in the number of publishers and the number of books that have been produced and sold is, to put it mildly, staggering. When I stepped into Tamil publishing, early 80s, finding a publisher was so difficult. You had to keep, I remember my first publisher, I must have cycled to his house about 50-60 times in a period of 6 to 7 months. And the standard size of the book was a Crown 1/8. Nobody published a book which was more than 200 pages. Short story collections would never exceed 300 pages. A long novel was so difficult to get published. But 2 years ago, somebody like me who doesn't write any fiction, a publisher came and said, "Sir, can you write a novel for 800 pages? Nothing less than 800 pages. So so you find the increase in the titles, the volume of the books, the nature of the books, and also the phenomenal amount of reprints. 10 years ago, it was impossible to get hold of a copy of any classic. The first Tamil novel published, you will have to search for it. The writings of Kalki, you will have to search for it. But now almost all the classics, or whatever are considered classics, are easily available in multiple editions. To just give you one example, somebody found a rare journal of the 1880s by one of the earliest free-thinking societies in India. So I am giving you concrete examples of the texts, because I think when we discuss books, we have to discuss books not just as the format, but in terms of its content. Without content, books don't make any sense. And that is a mistake that the predictors of books' death consistently make. We should not be making it. So this is a book about the free thinkers in 1880s in Tamil Nadu. Bunch of people have got together, been in touch with the free thinkers of West, and they are writing and publishing about Indian religious and spiritual traditions from a free thinking. It is, as you can imagine, it is as boring as it gets, unless you are directly interested in this topic. But the funny thing is that there are now, within a space of 4 months, there are 2 different editions of this compilation of these articles, running into 2,000 and 3,000 pages. One person was producing it, the other editor stole it from the press and reprinted that in a different format. So now this is how it is happening. So this is the situation. There is a great interest in the kind of new content that is available. New classes emerging. They have money. They want to buy books. And we should also thank these prophets of doom who say that the book will die. The moment they say that, all those people who are interested in books, we become very alert. The moment they say books are going to die, what I do is, when I give gifts, I stop buying chocolates as gifts. I start buying books. When I see a child, I try to gift a book to the child. We all do that. So we should not underestimate the value of this kind of, it's like economics, what they say, if you predict certain things, it might happen. But also by predicting certain things, you can make it not happen. Little Prince is a book which I have bought at least 50 or 60 copies. So this is something that we need to keep. So this is the situation in the Tamil context. I think it is growing, and I see that it will grow in the next 10 to 15 years. And I will try to talk about content. Let me continue with the question of content. Since we are talking about, when we are talking about the book, we are basically talking about what the books say. We have to look at the social structure of our country. What is the social context, the cultural context in which any culture industry works? we don't need to talk about the magnitude of our population and the cultural richness of our various peoples. And historically, large sections of these people have not had access to structures and institutions which are meant to propagate ideas. So for the first time in history, many of the sections, many of the communities, people from the lower castes, are for the first time getting access to these kinds of institutions, access to writing, access to publishing. So that is making a very big impact on how the publishing industry is working. You can't tell somebody from a social class who know that the book is a valued product, valued cultural product, to which the grandfathers, grandmothers, fathers and mothers did not have access to. Now when it comes near them, you go and tell them, no, this material book will not survive. It is the virtual book that will survive. Don't buy books. Don't store books and display books in your room. You cannot tell them that, because that is seen as a sign of cultural arrival. So you find that in terms of consumers, they are coming up. And more importantly, they are coming into the realm of production of ideas. They have their life and they want to write about their life. I still remember an interview that the Tamil writer Hepzibah Jesudasan gave some 15-20 years ago. She taught English. Apparently she did not have great competence in writing Tamil. But when she was discussing with her husband, another professor of English, that I am reading all these novels, but these novels are talking about only a small segment of society. She uses the term to indicate the Brahmin caste. And she asked her husband, is our lives not worth writing? So her husband says, who said so? You should write. And then she writes this novel in 1956, Putham Veeda. And then, it is now acclaimed as a classic. So through the decades, but especially in the last 20 years, with the kind of social changes that are taking place in our society, people from very different social communities, cultural communities, who have had access to education and more importantly to cultural tools, they want to write, they want to express themselves, and they want to express themselves in forms which had been accepted by the elite in their generation and the immediately previous generation. So that is the other question. There are various forms in which they write novels, they write short stories, and there is one very interesting product of their writings is the number of dictionaries and lexicons of dialects, both in terms of regional dialects and caste dialects that have come up in the last 15-20 years. It's very important. And many of these works have been done by creative writers. Somebody from the northern part of Tamil Nadu, he feels that the existing dictionaries are very biased to a certain set of upper sections of society. He says, why is, or certain regions of Tamil Nadu. He asks the question, why should my language, the lexicon that I use, the lexical range and the semantic range of the language that I speak in my region is very rich. It needs to be documented and needs to form part of the larger cultural discourse. So they are doing it. And in the last 10 years, this has made a very big impact on the Tamil film scene as well. Now you can see that the Madurai dialect has become the standard dialect that is used in Tamil cinema. You can look at the various regional, for instance, at least 3 or 4 films have come in the last 2 years in Tamil, which is about the coastal fisher folk of Tamil Nadu. That's very strange. Tamil Nadu, which has such a long coastline and has such a long history of fishing and seafaring, it had never left a imprint on the arts, literature, writing. But in the last 20-25 years, a new generation of writers have come, and that has made an impact on films as well, and they have collaborated with filmmakers, and that is coming out both in terms of books and films. So this is very crucial, and along with the publication of books, the cultural prestige that comes from books is very important. Even somebody like my friend, or rather the son of my friend, Kannan Sundaram, is here. Even somebody like him, who's the son of a very important Tamil writer, globally acknowledged writer, he could go abroad for publishing conferences only in the last 10 years. But this has opened up opportunities. Many of my friends who have taken up fellowships in the last 10 years, scholars, writers in residence, writing fellowships, I know at least 15 or 20 of them. You cannot imagine, conceive of the kind of pride that comes for, say somebody who's growing up in Arani, and because of his interest in books and his translation skills, gets a fellowship to go to Ireland, visit George Bernard Shaw's home, walk the streets where Joyce and Samuel Beckett walked, and come back and give interviews in the Tamil press. This is a possibility which has opened up only at the time when the death of the book was predicted. And I know one writer who is now 50 years old. He has finished only his SLC. He worked as a clerk in a rural school. Because his writings talk about an entirely different kind of society, it has drawn attention. The first is you also have to link this with the burgeoning translation scene. Until, of course, the 1940s, as part of the nationalist movement and the cultural awakening that went with it, translations were done by interested cultural activists. But once the state came in, Sahitya Academies and National Book Trust, translations stopped being produced by independent people. But again, in the last 15-20 years, the level of translations, the magnitude of translations from Indian languages into English. But I used to joke that probably Ambai, C.S. Lakshmi, I think more stories have been translated into English than she has actually written in the original Tamil language. Take the case of Bama. Before her book is complete in Tamil, the English translation rights are sold. So there's been a great increase in translations. And even though I am not very happy with the cultural connotation of it, English is a master language, and the translation of one's work into English gives, it's not only prestige, it is also gives a great amount of confidence. I can't go and talk to this SLC educated writer that English is the master language, don't do pranams at its feet. He doesn't care. Because his story is translated into English and published by Caravan, then it is published by HarperCollins. Then he is able to go to a writer's camp near River Hudson in New York, makes friends, and then travels to Switzerland. These are all the possibilities that have opened up in the last 10 to 15 years. And this is going to continue to give fillip to the communities from which this set of writers are coming from. So this is the aspect, and this is giving a new content. As long as we continue to focus on content, I think the form will follow. I mean, no determinism involved in this, but focus should be on content. So in this context, if you look at the fear is actually a fear of technology. So we have to see what technology is doing and why it is shaking us up, why is it causing anxiety. I want to look at it historically. As I said, always there is a fear of technology, especially in the Indian context, well-entrenched traditional societies which fear change. So it took a long time for new technologies to make inroads. I started by saying that the first Indian book was printed in Goa in 1577. But it was not until nearly 250 years later that the book becomes a very common object in India. It takes a very long time. But even then, the technology that we have used for book production has remained more or less the same. Even though technically hot metal technologies were available in India in 1880s. Newspapers in Chennai, for instance, were using linotype for publishing the newspapers. Rotary press was available even by the 1880s and 1890s for publication. As far as Tamil publishing or language book publishing went, the technology has remained stagnant. I think I can say with some amount of certainty that hot metal technologies never took root in Indian language publishing in any language. So it takes a long time for new technologies to come. It also comes with economies of scale. And I think the economies of scale are a very important aspect of our publishing. When our publishing is not in terms of 50,000 and 100,000, we can think of it as a disadvantage. But the advantage is also that what do we lose? What can we lose? If you are only publishing 1,000 copies and 2,000 copies, it cannot get any worse than that. It can only get better. And as I am trying to argue, that is precisely what is happening. It is actually getting better. When I entered publishing early 80s, even up to the 90s, whenever I saw a book printed by Thomson Press or All India Press, I used to dream, if only my books would be printed by Thomson Press or All India Press. If Tamil books could be printed in Thomson Press or All India Press, how wonderful it would be. The Prasad Press used to be very near my home, and because I had a friend who was a binder, working as a binder there, I would go to that place. When he showed me books, poetry books published by Pritish Nandi, I used to be amazed by the printing quality. What the new technology has actually done, instead of, I think, weakening Indian publishing, Indian language publishing, it has actually strengthened it. Because the new technology is a leveler, has been a great leveler. The gap between the publishing haves and publishing have-nots has come down very drastically. So when in 2004, one of my books was printed in a press for the first time in, that person is also here, in the microprint. When I went to microprint, the first thing that struck me was, yes, I have picked up a couple of Routledge books, which were Indian reprint was published, printed in this very same press. So it will not be very long before, a Tamil book start getting printed in Thomson Press. So this is a great level. It has become a leveler. Access to same technology has been enabled by low print runs. The big publishers are also scaling down their print runs, and the small publishers have remained at the same level or just gone up a little bit, which has meant that you are using the same technologies for your production. And I remember a poem that was written by a young poet 30-40 years ago. It actually said, the printing press which prints for S.S. Vasan's son, will it not print for me also? It didn't in those days. Now it will, it is. And actually the future lies here. So now we find, as I said, new technologies are leveler, same softwares are being used, same machines are used. Soon the same kind of tabletop machines are going to turn out books. So this is the revolution. DTP, I can't tell you how it has revolutionized publishing. Very importantly, it has weakened the centralizing trend that has been the aspect of publishing in India. My favorite example is of Veerasalingam Pantlu, the great Telugu reformer. From Rajahmundry, he moves to Chennai in 1890s because he thinks it is better to come to Chennai to publish Telugu books. So through the early 20th century, Chennai was the capital of Telugu publishing. But now what we find is that Chennai did not be the capital of even Tamil publishing. You can be a publisher from any part of the region, and that process will only accelerate and not weaken. Or rather, it will not be the precondition being located in the administrative capital or the cultural capital. I am using cultural capital because I find that Trivandrum is not the publishing capital of the Malayalam literary world. So you need not be located in the administrative or the cultural capital to produce books. So these are all the advantages that I think. Next thing is the question of what about the structures, distribution structures. Once again, the usual lament, the familiar lament is, oh, all the bookshops are being closed down. The bookshops are being closed down. I said, this is not our worry. If Barnes and Nobles are getting closed down, Waterstones is being closed down, or Basil Blackwell is being disinvested, it doesn't concern me, because in India, in the first place, how many bookshops did we have? So where is the question of closing down a bookshop? In fact, I would say in Chennai, in the last 1 month, 2 new bookshops have opened. I am talking about physical bookshops. And actually the trend is to see if there can be at least 1 bookshop in each town. This didn't happen earlier. Earlier at best you had only stationers who sold pencils and pen and paper which no writer bought because they couldn't afford to buy paper. We used one-side paper sent by the Soviet land news service, or we used paper cut off from the printing press. So now you find that the trend is actually the book shop network. My sense is actually increasing, but it is once again, as I said, from zero, anything is a improvement. And I think if you have a clear picture, clear understanding of what we are not a modern bakery, or we are not producing soaps and shampoos. We are producing cultural products, and by its very nature, I think it will be limited. And so the question I would say is that this prognosis about the fate of books, especially in terms of distribution. Once again, if you look at it, online buying has actually increased sales. It's very clear. Otherwise, people didn't know what to do with books. I still remember barely 15-20 years ago, authors would print their books and the books would be lying in their homes. They would have to give autographed copies to their friends and neighbors. That situation doesn't obtain anymore, despite the fact there is still no clear distribution structure. So the distribution structures, rather than disintegrating, are actually now taking the first baby steps of growing. And if we focus on that, any improvement is a real improvement that is going to strengthen publishing. Lastly, I would like to come to the question of editing. But before I do that, let me also say a few things about institutional purchases. I think there is a certain snootiness about writers and editors. We always look at marketing personnel as our enemies. Yes, they do act like enemies, yes. But we should not be enemies. And of course, the marketing people look down upon us. There needs to be a better kind of relationship. And marketing people also need to be sensitized that, books are unique products. It's not like you go to a shop, if there is no bonda, you can eat a bhaji. If you are looking for vadaka plantain bhaji and you have only onion bhaji, you can have onion bhaji. But book is not like that. I want Karamazov Brothers. That is the only thing I will buy. I don't want Tolstoy. In fact, it's like it is Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. In fact, if somebody asks Dostoevsky and you pull out Tolstoy, you might actually lose a customer. It would happen all the time. It is great amount of rivalry. But to a reader of Ramchandra Guha, you cannot pull out Arundhati Roy. So books are unique products, and as long as you realize that, it can only, as I say, the prognosis is very positive. So the focus should be on content. But then, as I said, look at marketing, especially institutional marketing, in a country like India where the state acts as a kind of pattern. We have to look at it very closely. I know it is one of the most corrupt systems. As I said, I've been part of a couple of library committees. Even though I hated it, I went there because I believe that, books have to be promoted. Just because, it is the greatest book, you have written the greatest book in the world, it doesn't mean that somebody is going to buy it unless you go push for it. And I don't hesitate to carry along a few copies of my books when I go and give talks. But don't worry, I have not brought any books now. You are safe. Your 795 rupees is safe. Don't worry about that. But I don't think it is wrong to do that kind of institutional purchases. Now, as we know, the number of universities in India is, just galloping. I know half of them are just out to make only money, but there are also state institutions. Their idea is not to make money. There are some other, all kinds of other interests involved except education, but there is always money allocated for buying books. And I used to say that, if every college library, I'm not even talking about school libraries, if every college library in Tamil Nadu used its 20 or 30,000 rupee allocation to buy the right books, not reminded books, textbooks and handbooks, there will be no forest left in India. We will be just sitting on a pile of money. So that is something that we have to focus on, but it can also have very bad consequences, as we know. The fact that the state buys 500 or 1,000 copies of almost any book in certain languages. I know that the Indian state pumps money into buying Hindi books. It actually works against the interests of books, book buying and book culture. So if there can be an intervention, it has to be a cultural movement where the pressure is from below on institutions to acquire good books. Then I am sure that will make a very important dent. And if we can push our marketing personnel to focus on that, that would be great. So, and finally, the question of editing. In relation to content, we also think of editing. Any day now, open the newspapers or you open your computer, pop-ups come up offering to publish your books. So people think that, publishing is the easiest thing in the world. Yes, avenues for publishing is increasing, but there is never ever going to be a time when an editor is going to be irrelevant. As long as we believe that a book is different from a blog writing, as long as you believe in that, the editor will be important. And editors will continue to play that wonderful role, and without them there will not be good books. And here is where I think, the huge publishing conglomerates make this mistake that, it's not like, auctioning players in T20 for T20. Authors value editors. It is very few authors will just switch editors because they get a bigger advance. I'm not saying that, authors are all idealistic, but there are so many examples. I think one of the most recent example was Amitav Ghosh. Until the very end of Ravi Dayal's life, he refused to give Indian rights to anybody else. Even though, most of his Western publishers didn't even know who Ravi Dayal was. So that is a very important aspect, which we find in Tamil. I continue to see this. It may not even be because of the editing skills, but also a certain sentimental attachment to things. I know one or two major writers, for instance, Neela Padmanabhan, refused to give books to, for instance, to Kalachodu, even to be included in the classic series, because he said, oh, Chettiar will get angry. That is, our something like, Gupta ji will get angry or something like that. Is the exact cultural equivalent. So that element is there. So we have to work on that. We should make, I know the relationship between editors and authors can be very difficult and fraught. Once again, that is can be the subject of, or is the subject of great books, how authors and editors have fought. It is also the grist for academic mills. People write stories about how, T.S. Eliot rejected George Orwell, or how Maxwell Perkins edited Ernest Hemingway. So these are all part of it. This is the whole culture of books is what we need to focus on, rather than simply about turnover figures, sales figures. And one final comment, perhaps I missed in all these things is the whole question of rights. I find that there is one session dedicated to discussing rights. Once again, as I said, nobody even heard the word world rights, translation rights, South Asia rights 10-15 years ago. I can say that if I don't know in Tamil Nadu, it means basically almost nobody knows except perhaps a handful of people who are involved in English publishing. So that is the situation. But now people are becoming consciousness. In fact, I'll go one step further. To this day, in the Tamil language, there is no term for royalty. Okay? It only very recently a neologism was coined. So from that situation, now authors are actually demanding royalty. Of course, please, publishers don't think this is the beginning of the doom. No, it is not. It is actually the silver lining in the whole issue. So the awareness of rights is a very important step in the growth. So everybody has a stake in it, and the stakes are negotiated properly, and a negotiation takes place on an equal footing, and negotiation takes place based on informed decisions. So rights, translation rights, all these things have actually expanded the scope of publishing. So overall, my picture is that my prognosis is that the book is not going to die in the next generation. Who knows, in a few years there might be a magnetic storm and all digital files will be lost. Who knows? I'll tell you, before the 26th of December 2004, I had never heard the word tsunami in my life, seriously. Tsunami, I don't mind if there is a magnetic storm. We have made so many mistakes, sometimes we don't learn. What the great book historian Robert Darnton said, he wrote this essay called The Great Book Massacre. when the microfilming technology came, huge amounts of money came to microfilm. People microfilmed newspapers, and after microfilming the newspapers, they destroyed millions and millions and volumes of newspapers. Now I am told in many places the microfilms are clumps, and the destroyed destroyed newspapers survive only in the name of the title of Robert Darnton's essay, The Great Book Massacre. The Great Book Massacre should not happen. And it is, I think, in our hands to ensure that the Great Book Massacre does not happen, at least in our country. Let us welcome the magnetic storm.